Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, the first choice to make college possible. As education costs rise, Thomas Nelson's affordable tuition, financial aid, and scholarships make college accessible to everyone. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. Whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. In July, in the city of Norfolk, 10 children's lives were changed forever. They were victims of gun violence, and 2 of them died. Since January of this year, 23 juveniles have been shot. And don't think for a moment that this is just an issue in Norfolk. Juvenile gunshot violence is an issue throughout Hampton Roads. Why are children in such danger? Why is the violence concentrated in our impoverished black neighborhoods? And why is it incumbent upon all of us to stop the madness? Up next on Another View, Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone with a law enforcement perspective on guns and our children. Another View will be right back after this news from NPR and WHRV News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Last week on Another View, we talked about gun violence and our youth with community activists who shared their perspective on how to stop the shootings and killings. Today, we continue the conversation, this time from the perspective of law enforcement. We have with us Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone, who is no stranger to this violence and has been very vocal about what he calls a public health crisis. How are you doing, Chief Boone?
Hey, good afternoon, Barbara. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Listen, before we start getting into the numbers and all of that, I really would love for you to share from your personal perspective, what goes through your mind when you get the call that, in particular, that a child has been shot?
Well, I'll give you a specific example. Not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was on my way to Northern Virginia to receive an award for crime suppression and leadership. And on my way there, I received a call that a 15-year-old had been shot in the chest. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, we as police chiefs and law enforcement profession, you know, we're getting recognized for our outcomes, but, you know, are we really making a difference in the long run? We're very good at making a difference in the short run, but are we really good at making a difference in the long run? And that young man ultimately ended up dying a couple days later. So, you know, it's always something that keeps me up at night, particularly now. And I say now because what folks don't know, my officers, they take guns off young people and young adults almost every day without issue. And my concern is, you know, we won't continue to be that lucky. And there will be an officer-involved shooting. And I just, you know, wonder what that reaction will be.
Bracing for something that you hope never happens, but is a very real possibility.
Yes. You know, again, almost every night we're taking some very sophisticated weapons off young people, young adults. And, you know, I'm thankful so far. So far, there hadn't been any issues.
So, Chief Boone, you know, gun violence, it's not new. I mean, it's been going on for a very long time. But why children? What's different now than in the past. And I know you've been tracking these guns, particularly in Norfolk, and the only jurisdiction to do it, in terms of, where these guns come from and all of that. But why children and why now?
Well, I'll tell you, 3 months into me becoming police chief, there was an article in the local paper. And the article said gangs, guns leads to Norfolk deadliest year in a decade. Mm-hmm. And there was a still photograph associated with the article. And it was 3 young African-American young men. And each of them had a gun in their hand, and they were smiling. Mm. I want to say 2 months later, 2 of the 3 were dead due to gun violence. Mm. So at that point, I made a decision to start tracking guns. Historically, the Norfolk Police Department, as well as most police departments in the state, if there's a crime and that crime involves a gun, we would typically place the gun on a voucher. The gun was merely trait of the crime, and we would never investigate the gun. So what we started doing here in Norfolk is every gun we recover from a crime or we recover off the street, we trace it to where it was originally purchased. And data I submitted to you clearly shows that we know where the guns are purchased. Mm-hmm. We know who's buying the guns. We know where the guns ultimately end up. And we know who most of the guns ultimately end up in certain folks' hands. Convicted felons and our youth, some as young as 11. And surprisingly enough, in the last 4.5 years of tracing these guns, we've recovered over 4,000 guns, and only about 200 or so were ever reported stolen. So that's a concern.
Wow. And isn't it a law that if you own a gun and it's stolen, that you're supposed to report it?
Well, that just went into effect this year. In fact, it went into effect July 1. That was something I was striving for 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. When we started this data collection, I met with several legislators and spoke to them about the issue of guns not being reported. These are the number of guns we recovered. It's mighty suspicious. You recover 4,000 guns and only 200, give or take, ever reported stolen. And before the legislation was in place, we could go to someone's door and say, do you know your gun was used in some crime? And they could merely say, I didn't know it was missing, or it was stolen. And we got a lot of that. So as of July 1, you're going to have to give us an answer. So,
have you ever spoken with an 11-year-old who, since you've taken guns off of people without it being a crime at the time, but just because they had it? What do they tell you? Why? I'm really curious as to what a child is thinking about in terms of owning or having a gun, and why they think it's necessary.
Well, I can tell you, in speaking to one of the young men that I talked about earlier in that photograph, I had an opportunity to speak to him before he died. Mm-hmm. And I met him in a discreet location. And the conversation was, didn't do well in school. My family's struggling. The gun and the gangs is my protection. And to use his term, I got to get, as his terms, what I can, because I won't make it to be, your age. And he was right. Months later, he had succumbed to gun violence. So, we have a host of young men out here, and you guys heard me say this over and over and over, and none of this is new. We just have a host of young men that have lost all hope. And this has become a way of life for them. I know we talk about programs, and those programs work for kids that aren't living that lifestyle. kids that are living that lifestyle, or the young men, I should say, they come out at night, and they come out, during the witching hours, as I call it, where you see the shootings and carjackings and things of that nature.
I'm going to ask a question of you that I asked of our community activists last week. I was in a meeting recently where with Councilwoman Royster, and she was saying that a parent came up to her, or a relative at a recent shooting, and said, you guys come into the community when the shooting happens. You're there for the vigil and you're there for the aftermath, but you're not there in the witching hour, as you called it. And I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Well, I can't speak for other folks, Barbara. I can tell you this: it's a known fact. Personally, for me, I want to know what the streets look like at night. So I patrol. Although I work during the day, I get out there and I want to see what my streets look like at night. And I go to all kind of neighborhoods. Norfolk has the upper class, middle class, and lower class. So I go to all neighborhoods, and it's striking the differences in those three neighborhoods. I go to some of our challenging areas, and you have people out at night, just hanging out. And in those areas that I'm speaking about have historically been challenging. I in that data that I provided you, there were checkpoints on the maps that show where the guns were recovered. And if you will look where the heaviest clusters are, it's in our challenging neighborhoods. So no, I don't personally just go out after the event. I'm out there all the time. I've tried to make the data, which has historically been kept close to the vest, I've tried to make it as transparent as possible for everyone to see. So you can't say you didn't know. And I've gotten some pushback regarding collecting gun data because folks see it as an encroachment on their Second Amendment rights, and I certainly embrace the Constitution. To get where I am, I've taken the oath at least 8 times. I'm a gun owner. I just don't support illegal gun activity.
And so you're saying that a lot of these guns, they're purchased legally in the beginning. They're through a legal purchase. And then they're stolen from households, stolen from cars, people not reporting it. But it feels like they're being dumped in certain communities as opposed to other communities. Is that true?
Well, let me say what I know, okay? Because I don't like to speak from emotions, which is why we started collecting the data.
Sure.
So where these guns are purchased, I don't know whether that gun salesman know whether or not he or she is selling a gun to someone that's eventually going to walk out of that store and sell it for double the price to someone that could not purchase the gun due to their felony history, whatever their criminal record may be. That's what you call a straw purchase. We know that activity goes on, number one. Number two, until July 1, if we went back to that individual's door and asked him about his gun, he could tell us, I didn't know it was stolen or I lost it, and that'd be the end of it. So now he or she can't say that. They're going to have to speak to us regarding, the whereabouts or what happened to that gun. Number two, guns are taken from larcenies. We have an issue with folks leaving guns in their cars in plain view sometimes, and it's just an opportunity for a young person to take that gun, obviously. And then we have the burglaries, of course. But, again, here's my concern. I'm going to say it again. Over the course of 4.5 years, we recovered 4,000 guns. I have an issue with only 200 plus ever being reported stolen.
Yeah.
Because I can guarantee you, if we had over 4,000 cars stolen, each of them would be reported stolen.
Yeah, I wonder, do you think people are embarrassed that they didn't lock it up, or they just don't want the police to know? And that's part of the reason why they don't report.
I think
possibly
it's multiple things. I think there's some illegal activity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just what you said as well. But nonetheless, there are young folks across Hampton Roads, across this nation, as a matter of fact, succumbing to gun violence. And the difference now is, just a few years ago, kids were getting caught up in the crossfire of young adults shooting guns. Now the kids are actually shooting at each other.
I've heard people say often it's a gang problem. Is that really what it is, or are these also just juveniles who are just trying to survive, regardless of whether they're actually in a gang?
Well, I can say from experience, Barbara, most are associated with a neighborhood gang, and there are some that feel as though they need to carry a gun just out of sheer protection. But the driving factor in gun violence in Hampton Roads is gang activity. That's the driving factor.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have for Chief Boone as we all try to grapple with this increase in violence in our communities and especially affecting our young people? 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So, Chief Boone, you said often that you started sounding the alarm years ago that gun violence is a public health crisis. Are people getting your message?
I think, and I can't take credit for it alone. I had folks that help ring the bell on this. As you know, there's several people in the community that talk about gun violence as well. I think that they just needed some data to support what they were saying. And I think that's where the Norfolk Police Department really made a large contribution to bringing awareness to this. There's no doubt when you look at the last 31 years, when you collect the data with respect to those that have died to gun violence, I sent you that data because I want folks to know. It was like over 830-something African-American men.
Yes.
And the next category, next to them, were Caucasian men. I think it was a little over 100.
It's 117.
Okay.
And this was January 1, 1989 through July 26, 2021. So,
and I use that date because that's how long I've been on the department.
Gotcha.
And I can assure you, that it doesn't get any better if you go beyond that as well. And this is not just Norfolk. Norfolk's just, bold enough to put the information out there. Again, people have been talking about gun violence, but you never had the data from law enforcement to support it. I think when you speak from emotion, people will tune you out. But when you start putting data in front of people, it's a different story.
It's striking, Chief Boone, because I'll just run through these very quickly. When you see the numbers jump out at you, so Asian females, there were 2, Asian males 3, Black females 96, and then you jump up to Black males 838. It just jumps off the page at you.
Well, that was my intent.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my intent. Because if you're looking at the data, we got to have a conversation, okay? This is no longer somebody just speaking from emotion. We got to have that conversation. And I got to tell you, I caught some flack for making that information so transparent because people...
What were they afraid of? I mean, why would you not want to make the information transparent?
again, people see it as being political. That's not my intent. My intent is to do something about it. Even my first, second, and third year here as chief, we had some historical lows in crime.
Mm-hmm.
But that thing that always bothered me was the gun violence. And I've always said, no matter how low your crime is, if you have shootings is the telltale of your city.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no matter if those other categories are down, because if some of these guys could shoot, our homicides would be much higher than it is, and that's for any city. So I'm always cautious when I talk about crime reduction and some of our successes, because that gun issue has always been in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my very first year, maybe my second year on the police department here in Norfolk. We had about 90 homicides. People don't remember that, but we did, and that was during the height of crack cocaine. And most urban cities were experiencing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. It struck me as I was reading some of the articles and so forth, and you were talking about how 11, 12, 13-year-olds motor skills aren't even enough to be able to focus the gun. So that's why the bullets spray everywhere, because they physically can't pull the trigger. That's
correct. We had an incident about a month ago. A young man, his video, and you see him shooting his gun, and it's going everywhere. And that's a shame, Barbara. Our young folks should not, when you're talking about 14, 15-year-olds, should not be in that position. And this is generational. This didn't happen overnight. This is years, and I will say this, because I must say this. My city council has been very supportive of me. Not one of them ever have told me, Larry, enough of that. In fact, they are trying desperately to fix the problem, and they know they didn't create it. None of us created it, but it's going to take some real effort to fix it. So currently, we're looking at some programs where we interface with former felons that, reform their life, and they have street credibility where they could talk to these gang members. But, it's not just about talking. It's also about, all right, what opportunities
are available for them.
Exactly.
Once they make that change.
That's correct.
Our phone lines are lit up, so I'm going to take a couple of calls. Let's talk to George in Suffolk. Hi, George. You're on the air. Can you turn your radio down, please?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely want to applaud the chief, for what he's doing. And, it takes a special person to do what he's doing. That is amazing, some of the things that he has actually accomplished. And also, I wanted to mention that, some of the avenues that if we could probably take, we have to educate the younger ones, the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds when they're in elementary school, and letting them know what gun violence will do, letting them know how it will affect their family and their lives, because this is what's going on. They're growing up seeing these things in their communities. Some of the things that are in some of these high-class communities need to be brought to some of these low-class communities. Flowers, cleaning the place up, letting them know some things that they can do to grow as an individual and add to the value of their city. They see violence every day. They watch it on TV. They play it on video games. So it has to start in schools to teach these ones how serious this will affect their lives.
Okay, George.
Again, I want to thank the chief.
Thank you so much for the call. Chief Boone, you want to respond?
George, thank you for the call. George was spot on. I have this saying, I don't know where I got it, but it's the me I see is the me I'll be. And, our young folks, some of them, not all of them, but some of them live in an environment where they hear gunshots every night, and then they wake up in the morning to a empty refrigerator. Then they go out that door and they walk or at least see some of the blood residue from what they heard that night. And then they go to school and we expect them to perform. Our young folks are constantly, let me underscore some of them, not all of them, exposed to violence where they never learn conflict resolution. I'm sure you've been in a store and you've seen a parent and she may have her kids with her and you can tell that she's stressed and she reacts to that child in such a fashion that you may think to yourself, well, that was a bit overkill. Okay. Now, I say that and I'm comfortable with saying that because that was my mother. Okay. I grew up in one of these environments and I can tell you, had I not gotten out of that environment, I would be just like some of my cousins and siblings, dead or in prison. So we got to fix the areas in which our young folks lay their head because, programs are great, but they aren't sustainable in terms of changing behavior.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about gun violence with Larry Boone, Chief of Police for the Norfolk Police Department. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Let's talk to Jupiter in Norfolk. Hi, Jupiter.
Hi, Barbara. Just real quick, I wrote a paper about you when I was in high school because you were one of my role models growing up.
Oh, wow.
You and Annie Gilstrap. I know. So I just want to say that the reason that we are having a spike in violence, specifically gun violence, is because we are housing insecure, we are food insecure, we are job insecure. You can't wake up every day with your parents being gone because they're working 3 jobs, but knowing that they still can't pay rent and they still can't put food in the fridge and they still can't pay the light bill.
Yeah.
This is exactly why, all this violence is happening. And on top of that, we're being gentrified. We have nowhere to go. The whole area in Norfolk, like look at Ocean View, Park Place, all of downtown, all of where these Black communities have been for generations, we don't have anywhere to go anymore.
Okay, Jupiter, let me get a response from the chief, and thank you so much. And I hope you got an A on your paper. Go ahead, Chief Boone.
Well, Jupiter brings up a good point. For an example, again, I like to speak from data, not emotion. If you look at the gun map that I provided you, and where you see the most clusters of guns recovered, it will go hand in glove with our educational map, where our children aren't achieving the results they should. It will go hand in glove with our crime map, where our crime tend to be the most intense in the city. It would go hand in glove with our poverty map, as well as our unemployment map. Those issues would fit nicely into those communities. And she's exactly right. She's exactly right. And this isn't new. I keep saying that. This is generational.
Yeah.
And it's going to take some heavy, committed lifting to change that narrative.
Chief, I hear people say, well, the community has to come out and they have to join together and they have to band together and fight against this. I heard a woman say on the news a couple nights ago, she said, I'm strapped because I'm terrified. And so you have people who are afraid carrying guns. You have people who want to commit crime carrying guns, and they're all in this mix together. Is it up to the community only to make this change?
Well, I know some folks, they're comfortable in saying, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right. But that's a bunch of malarkey. I say this, those communities didn't create those conditions. The same folks that created those conditions are the same folks that should provide resources to change the narrative. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So there's a program at Centera, Norfolk General, and CHKD called Foresight. Is my understanding that they have counselors. They work with the victims of gun violence. is it enough after the fact? Or is this a way of maybe doing future prevention so that the rest of the family can be healed?
That's a good question, Barbara. Foresight is off to a good start, but there's room for improvement, obviously. And the improvement will come from when they partner with the police department, when they have an opportunity to go into the communities that they're treating, when they have an opportunity to have a social worker at the hospital treating and speaking to an individual that's been shot for the fourth time. And that social worker could say, you know, John, you've been here 4 times in the last year and a half. Perhaps if I offered you this opportunity, okay, to do something different. I think when you have that captive audience and they're feeling vulnerable, that's the time that you work on that mindset. But you have to be able to provide real opportunity. So foresight, we're looking for ways in how we can improve that program. We're looking for ways in how we could tie it into what we're trying to do here in Norfolk with respect to the community violence intervention team that I spoke of earlier. So they're off to a good start, but there is room for opportunity.
Well, more people to get involved. Let's talk to Brooke from Norfolk. Hi, Brooke. You're in the air.
Hi.
You're in the air. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I called in because I was really shocked to hear that it wasn't already a requirement to report stolen firearms. And I want to know how that can be enforced. What can you do to make sure that people aren't just selling weapons and then later saying that they've been stolen when a crime is committed with them?
Well, thank you, Brooke. That's what was happening prior to July 1 of this year. The way it works now, if we come across a weapon that was used in the crime, we're going to go knock on the door of the original owner, particularly if the person we got the gun from was not the original owner, of course. And before legislation took place, they could simply tell us, look, I didn't know it was missing or I didn't know it was stolen. Now, once they are aware that their gun is missing or stolen, they have 48 hours to report it. And if they don't, I believe it's a class 4 misdemeanor. I could be wrong.
So is there a penalty or fine they have to pay? Is that?
I think that's associated with it as well.
Okay. Thanks,
But
Brooke.
and the thing with that, Barbara, you're just trying to change behavior. For so long, folks have been able to do some stuff that, we simply weren't monitoring. And I think now that they know they're being looked at, they may change their behavior with respect to, one, being a responsible gun owner. 2, if they're not a responsible gun owner with respect to straw purchasing and things of that nature, they'll stop.
Right. Let's take another call. Mark, you're on the air from Norfolk.
Hey, good afternoon, Chief Boone.
Mark.
Hey, good. Look, Chief Boone, I've got 2 different things. And one is that one is very radical, but you never know. What if we start taking our children, school-age children, and start, just as we introduce them to sex education, create an atmosphere where we can teach our children in our communities how to safely handle weapons and even give them an opportunity to fire the weapons and let them see the destruction from their own hands of weaponry. Like I have several Caucasian counterparts. They start their children out at 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. So that's why gun ownership is absolutely nothing to the other community. The second thing is, which I actually walked it out a little bit. I contacted the NRA and sent a proposal for a POTC, just like the ROTC, but it would be a police officer training corps. And I would love to talk to you a little bit more. I went into the weeds. I got the details and everything else. But the bottom line is police departments like yours, Virginia Beach, and all across Hampton Roads and across the country, you have a recruiting issue. If you could get your recruiting issue right and be able to cross the sphere, be able to have a percentage that's equal or greater to the communities, especially that you're having problems in, you'll be fine. And what the POTC would do, also one, would give them a front seat starting at 8th grade, 9th grade, all the way through 12th grade to what is policing.
Okay, Mark. Mark. We got your point. And the only reason I have to cut you off, and I'm so sorry, but we've got a ton of calls, and I'm trying to make sure that we can get folks on as quickly as we can. Let me let the chief respond to what you said, and I'm sure you will have an off-line conversation with him with all the details. Okay? Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate the call. Chief, you want to respond?
Yeah. So to Mark's question is actually twofold. I don't embrace introducing guns to young folks that hadn't learned conflict resolution just yet. I think the embracing the conflict resolution first should go before introductions of guns. That's number one. Put that away. Number two, the program that he's speaking of, I just introduced that concept to the city manager. One, focusing on high school students that have an interest in law enforcement, kind of creating a cadet program where we pay them a wage. And once they hit the age of 21, they can make that seamlessly transition into the police department, where they had an opportunity, one, to get an idea what it's like, and two, they'll know what to expect. So good question. I don't necessarily agree with the first part, though.
Okay. What happens to the guns that you confiscate?
We voucher them, and then at some point, it used to be we destroyed them. But I think there's law in effect that precludes us from destroying them. I think we have to. Sell them back to the community, not the police department. They will go to a federal licensed official. But as I recall, we used to destroy them. But I think there's law now that precludes us from destroying
them. Okay, let's talk to Elena from Norfolk. Hi, Elena. You're on the air.
Excellent program. Congratulations, Chief Boone. I want to bring a concern that I have to the conversation. It makes my heart very sad that I see this as what happened with the opioid epidemic. When it was perceived as a problem with the Black community, it was criminalized and penalized. Once there was a sense that this was throughout all communities and white people were affected, all of a sudden it became a health issue, a concern for making people healthy and not just punishing them. I appeal right now, based on the statistics and the facts that Chief Boone has presented, every parent's heart should be broken, not just the hearts of parents who are Black or people who are Black. Everyone's heart should be broken at these numbers. And to put that heartbreak to thinking, what would I do if it were my child or happening in my community?
Okay, Elena, thank you so much for the call. We appreciate it. Let me let Chief Boone respond.
Thank you, Elena, for the call. You'll be happy to know that, since we started making this information available, folks from all walks of life, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ+, they've all reached out to us wanting to make their contribution. How can I help? So I agree with that. You do have folks that care. They just don't know how to make that contribution. So we're starting that dialogue. And she's right, about how certain issues become a crisis when it affects certain walks of life. For an example, I remember when there was an issue with e-cigarettes 2 years ago, where 3 young folks died as a result of e-cigarettes, and immediately it was a public health crisis. And, we got folks, dying every day, particularly African Americans, due to gun violence.
Right.
And it's still okay. Let's continue to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's what the frustration is that people feel like we're doing a lot of talking, but we're not getting a lot of action happening. Willie joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Willie. You're on the air.
Hello. Thank you, Chief Boone. You sound like you've got an awesome... Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go right ahead.
It sounds like you've got an awesome program, but I'm just wondering, straw purchases and felony possession are already federal crimes. Where's the U.S. attorney in this? And I'm about to be flown over for a jet, so I'll take it off the air.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the call.
Well,
Chief?
that's a good call. That's a good question. And here recently in Norfolk, we had that federal roundup. But what folks don't know is we're starting to develop regionalized teams to include the ATF, U.S. Attorney's Office, Commonwealth Attorney's Office, DEA, FBI. And we're going to start approaching this issue surgically. For far too long, we focused on the end user. And what I mean by end user, the folks that we ultimately get the gun from. We're going to start focusing on those folks now that we believe are involved in illegal gun activity.
Mm-hmm. So, Chief, one other thing I want to talk to you about before, because we only got about 7 minutes left. But you also, Police Department, Norfolk Police Department, you've been very transparent and very active in terms of the behavior and activities of your officers in the police department, particularly in light of George Floyd and everything else that is happening. And you have two things. You have a data hub, and then you have this partnership with the Center for Policing Equity. Can you just tell us a little bit about both of those?
So shortly after the George Floyd protest, one of our protests was the protesters demanded that the Norfolk Police Department show their use of force reports, and City Council immediately started figuring out a way how we could do that. So we created this use of force dashboard, and what that shows is where we spend the bulk of our time in the city, the racial breakdown of officer and suspect, the type of force that was used, and in addition to that, the zip code and where it occurred. Now, I'll be honest with you, the data shows that we have a adverse impact on African Americans as it relates to the racial breakdown of the city, as it relates to the racial breakdown of the Norfolk Police Department. Now, that does not mean, I want to say this again, that does not mean that I have officers, stopping African Americans just because. So I don't want folks to hear Chief Boone saying that. We hired an outside agency to take a look at that data that I just spoke about and put it in some context as to why that is occurring. And at the end of the day, they're going to involve city folks, city government officials, police department, as well as the community. And Dr. Filer and City Council's vision is this. We're going to put together a citizen review board. The citizen review board, along with CPE and those community stakeholders that I just mentioned, will analyze the data, contextually put it in perspective, and make recommendations how we as a law enforcement profession can minimize our footprint in the African American community.
Wow, that's huge.
Well, as I said, if you're going to do it, be bold about it.
Absolutely. So the dashboard can be found on the on Norfolk.gov's website, I believe, and also the police department's website, so that all the numbers, and it's updated daily, correct?
That's correct.
That is correct. So we've got about 3 minutes left, Chief. I really want you to give the community some sense of what we can be doing as individuals to try to make a difference.
I think, again, I think for the most part, folks want to make a contribution, I think, first of all, you arm yourself with awareness. And that data that I provided, WHRO, is free. I give it to people all the time. And in addition to that, in the interest of time, okay, if there's something you want to talk to me about that can make a difference and you just didn't have an opportunity to call in, my cell phone number is 757-390-0384. And I give my number out to everyone, so that's really not a big deal to me. I really want to hear from folks and how we together can make a difference with respect to this gun violence, because it's not on police alone. There's no way in hell the police department can defend this by themselves. We're going to need the support of our community and our city leaders.
And also, shouldn't people also realize that it affects police also when they have to come out for these calls? And when they have to deal with this.
It doesn't only affect police, because yes, Barbara, it does. But I can tell you, I was on a homicide scene one night, and one of the cameramen, African American cameraman, he has some choice words, but he said, "I am sick of this blankety blank blank blank. When are we going to learn?"
Yeah. It's a lot. So Chief Boone's cell phone number, again, is 757-390-0384. If you have something that you'd like to talk with him about that would be concrete and actionable to help all of our communities to stop the violence, let's all work together. Chief Boone, it is always a pleasure to be with you and to have you on the show with us. So thank you so much for caring.
Thank you, Barbara. And I like that, concrete and actionable. No
Absolutely.
Emotion, concrete and actionable. Thank you.
All righty. You take care.
All right.
And
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Essie Patha-Murkerson from Law and Order. You are listening to Another View.
Yes, it's going to take more than just law and order. It's going to take all of us to try to help make this change. Thanks for staying with us. Malik Hawkins has been smiling for the camera professionally since he was 18 months old. We first introduced you to Malik about a decade ago when he was 10 and starring in the movie Troop 491. Well, Malik is a rising junior in college now, and he isn't slowing down. As our Lisa Godley found out, in addition to his studies, he's busy acting, recording commercial voiceovers, and performing his music live with his first rap album out later this month.
I feel like I'm turning it up, feel like I'm bubbling up.
When I was in Greensboro, I was doing shows every 2 weeks, sometimes every week.
For a 19-year-old Malik Hawkins, getting it done is a way of life. Not only does he use clean rap to entertain the masses, but does voiceover work for a leading toy manufacturer. Malik is also no stranger to the big or small screen. He recently wrapped up his latest film, The Hope of Escape, which was shot in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Hope of Escape. It actually follows a true story that happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, following basically some slaves that escaped from Wilmington into freedom. We were literally on the grounds of where the true story actually happened, filming in those same exact places, in the same buildings, in the same waters. It's the first film that I filmed of that nature, and it was definitely a new experience and probably one of my favorite shoots, just off the fact that we were really in the Atlantic Ocean. A part of the scenes, we were really in the river. We were really in the places where our ancestors had to be and had to escape from. And so it was definitely powerful for me.
In the film, Malik portrays George Price.
George Price is basically one of the people that was influential and essential to the plan of actually escaping. He was someone that was basically keeping everyone else on task while they were still trying to live their regular lives, while trying to figure out how they were going to get out of there. He was someone that was checking in with people, making sure they had their plan together, making sure, we need to meet here at this time, things of that nature.
Meanwhile, this rising junior at North Carolina A&T isn't about to let any grass grow under his feet. Heading from the movie set to the audio booth to record voiceovers for Hasbro's Beyblades.
Things that kind of slowed down with COVID, of course. So I was blessed to be able to finally get back in the studio for some voiceover work this summer. I believe I've done 3 voiceovers since I've been home this summer. The most recent being for Hasbro Gaming. I actually got called back to work with them again just recently. So it seems like I've built a pretty good relationship with them.
Currently majoring in business with a focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, Malik says school comes first, but adds that time management is critical in order to pursue his passions, and he encourages others interested in seeking careers in the arts and entertainment industry to do the same.
If you want to do something like that, you just got to do it. You can't wait for perfect conditions to start doing something. You have to take that first step of faith and then somewhat figure it out along the way, or just make it make sense along the way. But if you never take that first step because you're waiting for this, I need to wait until I feel like I have all the top of the line studio equipment, or I need to wait until I get the best agent in the world or anything like that. But no, you got to take that first step. And second of all, especially in terms of the music, you got to be doing it for the right reasons, because a lot of people get into music just because they see other people doing it and they feel like they're going to get some clout off of it. It's going to be an easy way to make money. It's going to be an easy way to get popular, things of that nature. But if you're not doing it for the actual art, it's not going to feel authentic.
As for his own music, Malik says his style is diverse and melodic, and he loves that people of all ages can enjoy it.
In terms of keeping the music clean, first of all, it's just easier to market, because getting on the radio and things of that nature, or even working with like companies that may want your song for a commercial or to put in a movie or something like that, most likely they're going to need the clean version anyway. So it cuts out a whole step in the process by going ahead and making all your music clean. And beyond that, it puts me in a position where there's 5-year-olds that know all the words of my songs, and there's also 40-year-olds that know all the words of my songs, and there's also people my age that know all the words of my songs. And it allows me to definitely be more diverse with my crowd and people that I can reach through my art.
And this Chesapeake native's reach continues to expand. Leak from the Peak's song Doubling Up has been featured on 103 Jams, and his song Go to Space gets a featured spot next week. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And you can find Malik's work on his IMDb page, which actually is the actor's profile website, his YouTube page, and social media pages under his name, Malik, and it is spelled Malique Hawkins. His music can be found on all music platforms under Leak from the Peak. Congratulations, Malik. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your life with us. And I encourage you to think about today's conversation and figure out what you can do to help engage our youth and provide them with a different, healthy, and healing perspective about life. This violence in our communities has got to stop. Share today's show with someone you know who wants to get involved. You can find the podcast at anotherviewradio.org. We're also on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View, it's the Another View Roundtable, and we're going to be talking again about this pandemic. And speaking of the pandemic, have you gotten your COVID vaccine shot yet? It's a question that I'm going to ask every single week until we all get the vaccine and stop the spread of this deadly disease. Protect yourself, your family, and our community. Please, if you haven't gotten your shot, get your shot. Our theme music is an original composition, especially for Another View, by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. Our intern is Lang Burgess. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a safe and wonderful weekend, and let's get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College. Whether you want to start your bachelor's degree or advance your career through a short-term program, the first choice is Thomas Nelson Community College. More at tncc.edu/firstchoice.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.